My name is Sean Gallagher. I'm Chief Operating Officer of the United States Study Centre at the University of Sydney, and welcome to an event that we've titled, What MOOCs Mean for Universities, Revolution or Evolution? And I hope that you can all see me. Hopefully those behind pillars might be able to see me through some of the mirror reflections. Maybe that's my better side. Tonight we're being recorded by APAC for the parliamentary television station, as well as ABC Radio Big Ideas. And we have a real treat for you tonight. We have Daphne Keller from Coursera. We have Andrew Stevens from IBM, Fred Hilmer from the University of New South Wales, and Jeff Garrett, former colleague, but co-conspirator, and now Dean of the Australian School of Business at UNSW. But first, before I set the scene for tonight, it behooves me to make a couple of thank yous. First of all, to thank the New South Wales government, and in particular trade and investment. They've been partners with the US Study Centre since the beginning, for 7 years now, but most importantly, in the context of higher education, they have been a supporter of us for the last couple of years. Last year, they commissioned a report for us, which we wrote on multinational universities, which led to some policy outcomes for the government here. This year, they have likewise commissioned a report for us, which we titled Disruptive Education, Technology-Enabled Universities. And I was very pleased to hear this morning on ABC Radio News, Gabrielle Upton speaking about the importance of MOOCs to higher education and the need for universities in Australia to innovate. MOOCs, what an ugly acronym. It barely existed 18 months ago, but this week we had major announcements. The University of New South Wales and the University of Western Australia have joined Coursera. 5 out of the 8 universities in the group of 8 have joined major MOOC platforms. The other MOOC platform other than Coursera is edX for Australian universities. Other announcements. Only a couple of weeks ago, Daphne Keller at Coursera announced another $43 million in venture capital, as well as other funding to support the innovation experiment that she and her partner, Andrew Ng, are undertaking. But before we go any further, what is a MOOC? Well, for a crappy acronym, it's actually making universities cool. A MOOC is at the highest level is taking the best courses from the best lecturers from the best universities, putting them online and making them available to anyone, anywhere, anytime for free. But these aren't just videos of someone standing at a pulpit like me right now, lecturing to a class. These are highly produced, interactive videos which are spliced up into intellectual concepts. So rather than being in a lecture where you're downloaded with 100 different ideas and concepts and hoping that the lecturer is hoping that you've been able to master all of that knowledge, it's broken down into individual concepts, and it helps learners along the way. So there are little progression quizzes to assist learners to ensure that they capture each of the concepts. For universities, 18 months in university time is but a blink of an eye. So why are Jeff and I confident in making the bold claim that MOOCs are here to stay? Why? Well, we believe that MOOCs add value to universities in many ways, but I'll give you 3. First of all, in terms of global brand projection. Some of these MOOCs have students of over 50,000 students, some even more than 100,000 students. Universities are now reaching corners of the world that they would never have hoped to have ever reached. Mongolia is one of the case studies that many people often talk about. But you can go to any developing country, as well as in developed countries. Australian students are trying MOOCs. Melbourne University MOOCs are very popular. 30% of the students at Melbourne University MOOCs are Australian. So I suspect that students from UNSW and University of Sydney, they're testing out University of Melbourne to see what it's like. So try before you buy. The second is better pedagogy. The big data of MOOCs is astonishing. Daphne might mention a bit later on tonight that we have more data Coursera has more data on higher education than has ever existed in higher education before. Every click of the keyboard, every mouse, every video, all of it is recorded. And from that, we have a very rich source of data by which we can better inform pedagogy. And hopefully, that will then also lead to flipping the classroom, where the MOOC can actually become like a next-generation textbook. And thirdly is personalized learning, but at scale. So rather than in a textbook, which was a linear format of getting from A to B, through MOOCs, there's the potential that there's many different paths, many different learning paths to get from your basic level of knowledge to the next concept. And who knows, maybe one day MOOCs might even make $1. But in the report, that part of also why we think MOOCs is going to stay here is that MOOCs is influencing universities in other ways that have already existed, and that is in online degrees. And MOOCs are a lightning rod to ensuring that our online degrees, through distance education and traditional online, are becoming much more interactive and focused on the outcomes for the learner. And the third area, which Jeff and I wrote about in our report, is what we're calling the Prius University, the hybrid campus. This is where technology is integrated on every level of the experience for the student. But let's get back to our treat for tonight. Tonight, we're privileged to have one of the world's leading pioneers in the MOOCs revolution, and that's Daphne Keller from Coursera. We've been fortunate. We had a bit of a window of opportunity when I contacted Daphne some time ago to come to Australia. She had 1 week in her entire calendar at which she had nothing scheduled, and we were very, very fortunate that she was able to say yes. Also on the panel tonight is Fred Hilmer, who leads the University of New South Wales, and also Andrew Stevens, who is the CEO of IBM. I won't introduce them formally, but I will pass on to my friend and co-conspirator, Jeff Garrett, who's the Dean of the Australian School of Business at the University of New South Wales. Jeff has had a long and illustrious academic career with appointments at Stanford, Yale, Oxford, and Wharton at the University of Pennsylvania, which is now one of the biggest MOOC converts that exists. But enough from me, I'll pass over to Jeff.
Thank you, Sean. Thanks to everyone for being here. Let me just add my personal thanks to the panelists, and one way to do that would be to start with how far they've come. So Daphne was looking pretty tired at the end of yesterday because she did have this 1 week free in her calendar. Little did she know that we'd cram 24 hours into every day of the week that she had spare. So thank you for your forbearance in sticking it out with us and being revived tonight, she told me. So that's great. Fred Hilmer, my boss at UNSW, who's also at the moment the head of the group of 8 universities in Australia, doesn't have Delhi belly, he has China belly. Fred was telling me that he was in some new mega city in China that I'd certainly never heard of yesterday, and he flew in last night. And it's great, Fred, that you're still upright enough to be with us here this evening. And Andrew came all the way from North Sydney, probably. But the reason he's got a pen in his hand is he's counting the number of times we use the word pedagogy. Because apparently in our report, I'm sure he threw IBM Analytics at this, we used that word 57 times in 48 pages. That's a high hit rate. So I'm glad to have Andrew here as a sort of on-the-cheap editor, because not only will he help us with our written stuff, but he'll ensure that I don't use that word ever again this evening. The way we're going to run tonight is to make it as living roomy and chatty as possible up here on the podium, and then as quickly as we can to integrate all of you into the conversation, because I know there are so many familiar and important faces in the audience that it would be a real shame to leave the content production just to us on the stage. So we'll get to a Q&A as quickly as we can. And we've also asked our panel not to read out speeches and just to sort of say some provocative things to get things going. And knowing all of them as I do, I don't think we've got any problems there. So let me start with Daphne, and we will go in a sort of cascade effect, because I think this is the way to think about it, really. It's, boy, what's the stimulus of MOOCs about? What does it mean for universities? Ask Fred Hilmer, and then say to Andrew, leading in Australia a company that says it's driving a smarter planet, what does this innovation in universities look like from the business world, and how could business potentially help us? So that's essentially the batting order. And I said to Daphne that I was going to start with an observation that came to me having listened to her yesterday. As many of you know, in the world of sort of sustainable business these days, people tend to talk about a triple bottom line. And Coursera looks to be a triple bottom line. The triple bottom line is line 1, better education. I'm not going to use that word, Andrew. Line 2, much greater access. And line 3, boy, we'll even make some money out of that and our investors will be happy. So if you were trying to, I don't know whether that triple bottom line is a decent crystallization of Coursera, but if you're going to give us, just to start with, a few high points, what's really driving you, what keeps you going 24 hours a day on this enterprise, what would you tell us in this group?
So first of all, do you mind if I just start with a very brief history of how we got to where we are?
Right,
today?
in the beginning, in the middle of 2012.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
No,
Prehistory, we call that. No, okay.
Long time ago, in September of 2011.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Mine was the modern history, the 2012 history.
So this really started in September of 2011 with an experiment done by Stanford University. This is pre-Coursera. This really is prehistory.
But this is Sebastian Thrun?
No,
or others?
Well, no, it was, so actually if you want to go back even further, then it goes back to about 5 years ago when Andrew and I started developing a lot of the ideas that went into what were ultimately the first MOOCs and all of that P word. And the design and the infrastructure for creating a great online experience for students. And that is what culminated in September of 2011 with the production by Stanford University of the 3 first modern-day MOOCs, which were 3 large computer science classes that were offered to anyone around the world to take for free. And within a matter of weeks, each of them had an enrollment of 100,000 students. And for us, this was a clear moment in history because this was an opportunity to take, if we could live up to it, to take something that had been available only to a tiny handful of people privileged enough to go to an institution like Stanford or the University of New South Wales and really make it available to everyone around the world with an internet connection. Because taking those classes, we had students that started from 10 years old and went into their 90s, from 150 or 160 countries, we have more now, and from every walk of life. People who are working professionals and people who are trying to find themselves and become what their aspirations could lead them to. And I think that it was one of those opportunities that morally you just couldn't pass up.
Can I ask you a question about
Sure.
that? So Sebastian Thrun, you can tell us now whether this is folk wisdom or whether it really happened. This is a founder of another enterprise called Udacity. He says that when they did the exams on his computer science course, the first Stanford student came 411th out of the 100,000 students who were doing it, i.e. 410 students who were telecommuting online beat the best Stanford student at the best, maybe with MIT, the best engineering school in the country. Is that true, or did he make that one up?
So it's true, but I think there's a nuanced answer to that.
Okay.
So first of all, let me just say that as a basic premise, I'm sure there are some amazing people out there that for whatever reason, geographical, social, or financial, they just never made their way into Stanford, and that they're every bit as good as Stanford students. So I don't dispute the basic premise. The specific statistic here, even though numerically it might be accurate, should be, one should realize that Sebastian allowed unlimited numbers of submissions for every quiz. And so it partially is a question of how patient and how much work the students were willing to devote to actually getting perfect scores on the assignments. So I think one should factor that into this.
That's
analysis.
an interesting story in and of itself, isn't it? We want to drive more students to get A's rather than have a normal curve of distribution. Every student should get an A, can get an A if they work hard enough.
It helps if there's randomization in the questions, but...
All right, okay, sorry, I didn't want to derail you. Okay, so you guys did this thing and you thought, wow.
Yeah, so anyway, so that digression aside. So, yeah, so we thought, wow, and that this was an opportunity that we just really couldn't let go. And so after consulting with various colleagues and Stanford administration, we decided that the right way to live up to that was to basically not just make this about Stanford, because there's other great institutions out there that could help contribute education to people everywhere. And so we spun this out of Stanford as a separate entity, now called Coursera. That was January of 2012. We launched officially in April of 2012, so let's see, 15 months ago, with 4 universities, Stanford, Princeton, Penn, and Michigan, 200,000 legacy students from the Stanford courses in the fall, and 37 courses. 15 months later, today, we're at 4.25 million students. 86 institutions plus a bunch in the pipeline that have not yet announced officially, and 415 courses. And I think that sort of really sets the tone for where we hope to go with this. 4.25 million students is a lot. But there's hundreds of millions of students out there that could benefit from this kind of education. So let me talk just for a moment about the students, because we get emails from students, probably hundreds in any given week, of people who tell us how access to education that they would never otherwise have had has completely transformed their lives. These are people who live in a poor village somewhere who ended up going to study in a top institution somewhere around the world. These are people who, without any kind of formal education, learned enough to get a job, a white-collar job that they would never have otherwise had. People with serious medical conditions who are trapped in their home and really don't have an opportunity to get out and experience the world except via this kind of experience. You get hundreds of these emails, and I can tell stories for an hour and not run out. And it's for those people that we're really doing this. So let me talk a little bit about to answer the question.
So number 2, you've done access. What about quality? We won't use the P word. Let's talk about what you're doing educationally that you're so excited about.
So I haven't finished talking about access, though. So I'm going to come back to access
More than the 4
end.
million you want and the hundreds of millions.
Yeah, I want to talk about. I'm going to come back to access at the
Okay.
end, because I think access is really fundamental to what we're trying to achieve. So I'm going to come back to access, but let me talk about quality. And somewhere, I guess, around there, we'll get into revenue, because you want me to talk about revenue.
Oh, that's the third one. Yeah.
So, okay, so in terms of quality, for me, the entry point into this 5 years ago, like I mentioned, was because I thought it was a really silly waste of time that I would walk into a classroom full of really smart students, and I would pull out last year's lecture notes, blow on them to remove the dust, and then go and give the same lecture that I'd given the previous year, telling the same jokes at the same time, and not really engage with.
I hope you updated on the jokes that didn't work. Isn't that what we're supposed to do?
Well, you know, the hope was that nobody was taking the class again from the previous year, so that they wouldn't recognize
A new
it.
random draw,
Yeah.
maybe they'd have a different sense of humor.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it seemed silly that there was never an opportunity for that kind of engagement. And for me, this was, when I realized that, that's when I went to talk to Stanford President John Hennessy, and I said, you know, John, this is really a stupid waste of time. We should be doing this differently. We should be using that precious time when a professor is in the same room with the students to actually do something that's a dialogue, that's a conversation, as opposed to, you know, just me standing there and everybody facing forward and they're all scribbling their notes. And John is a very visionary guy and very forward-thinking, and he said, "You're right." So he gave us money to get this process started. And so for me, this was all initially about that P word, the pedagogy, of how do we teach students in the 21st century. The lecture is an incredibly outdated mechanism that is known to be ineffective for teaching anybody anything. And a much better mechanism is for students to come into class having already learned the basics, the basic content, the basic skills. And then in class, you actually have things like, how do you take an ill-formed problem that nobody quite can wrap their brain around and turn it into something concrete that you can apply the tools that you learned in class? How do you learn to convince somebody that your point of view is...
We're concerned about your beautiful scarf and what it's doing to the mic, so maybe you use the handheld.
Okay.
And we turn that one off.
Again. Okay.
Let's see if it works.
Okay, is this better? Okay.
Yeah.
How to take an ill-formed problem and formulate it, how to convince other people that what your opinion is right and has merit, and so on. All those skills that employers tell us, and I guess we have someone from IBM who can attest to that or not, that the students that we ship out into the big wide world after they graduate do not have those skills enough and are not job ready, even if they know a lot of calculus and a lot of physics and a lot of history. And so I think the quality here of being able to learn stuff at your own time, at your own pace, and then at the same time, after having done that, come to class having achieved a certain level of mastery and really learn those much more deeper thinking skills, I think is where the quality is going to come in.
So in the jargon these days, we're calling that flipping the classroom.
Yes.
Okay, so then let's briefly then go to the the revenue question. Right. So it's now not a $64,000 question for you; it's the $65 million question. Why have the interesting thing about your investment profile is in the beginning you got some money from universities who had some faith in you, but more recently, in a world in which venture capital has become much tighter, you were telling me that you're beating them away with a stick, and in fact you get to choose among your investors.
That is true.
You've got you made $800,000 from your credentialing experiment called Signature Track.
Yes.
What is the business model of a MOOC?
Right.
Let me get this right. You're taking the highest quality talent on earth. You're giving it away for free.
Yep.
How does that work?
And so I actually want to argue with Sean, who said that maybe one day we'll make $1. We've made a lot more than $1.
800,000, right? We say in the report.
We're beyond that a little bit now. But anyway, so there's a number. So first of all, let me just say that the very fact that we have brought in any revenue in the second year of this project is considered remarkable by our investors. Most internet companies don't even start thinking about revenue until year 5 or 6.
Right? Does Facebook have any revenues now? I guess it's got
Facebook
a few dollars,
has no. Facebook does have revenue, but Facebook is in year 10 now.
Yeah.
And it took a while before they made any money. Google, Amazon, Zynga, LinkedIn, all of them were in year 5, 6, or 10 before they made any money. Our investors are quite confident that with the kind of traffic that we're getting, the uptake, the retention of students who come back to take class after class, that it will not be a problem to make this a sustainable model. So let me talk specifically about some of the ideas that we have along these lines. One of them, which we've already started to execute on, is what Jeff described as the signature track. It's what we call it. It's an identity verified certificate. It's aimed primarily at the continuing education population because it's not credit bearing. You don't get university credit for it. But if you already have a degree, you probably don't care about that. And so students come in, they verify their identity. It's actually quite cool because at the same time they create a biometric profile which uses keystrokes. So it turns out that if Jeff and I type the same phrase, it's very easy to distinguish who typed it, me or him.
Right, mine are the ones with all the errors. Yours are the ones that are accurate. Yeah. So,
and it's impossible for me to type like Jeff, even if he really tries to explain it to me. How do you explain to somebody how to type like you, and vice versa? And so we can then recognize you every time you come to the platform, and we know that you're there participating in the learning and submitting the work yourself. And so at the end, we can give students a much more meaningful credential that says this person completed the class. And the universities are willing to put their brand on that, even though it's not credit-bearing. And people find that of value, especially when we charge something like $50 for it, which is really not a lot of money. For something that you've just spent 50 hours working on, paying $50 to get something that says you've actually completed it, it seems like a worthwhile thing. And so people do it.
And they get a tangible benefit from it because they can present it to an employer to demonstrate that they have competency in something, difficult from a top university. And they help support all the people who can't afford or don't want to pay for the content. And so that's one revenue model, but there's a number of others. We've been approached by, probably hundreds of different organizations who want to basically use the content for internal instruction, say, on their own campus. Many of the courses we have are really unique, and other institutions don't necessarily have an instructor who can teach that course at that level because instructors in that discipline are hard to find. But those courses are sometimes very valuable, like data analysis or gamification. And so they basically want to adopt the course into their own curriculum, facilitate it with a local instructor who doesn't have to be an expert in the discipline because they don't have to prepare the content and they don't have to grade any assessments. And all of a sudden they give a richer curriculum to their students, and a small part of the tuition revenue that comes from those students goes back to support the content development and the platform development. So that's another revenue model that we've had a lot of interest in. And that's just two of many that one can come up with in this context.
So can I just ask you the last question, that just anticipating what some people in the audience may be interested in. The normal critique, as you know, is no one completes a MOOC. And you smile and you say, that's part of the point. People don't need to, you've got the model wrong if you obsess about 3% completion rates. Can you just muse a little bit on that?
So people who argue and complain about the completion rates of MOOCs have never stopped to think about what the MOOC population looks like. When somebody signs up for a college class, they do that with a declared intent to complete the class. When somebody signs up for a MOOC, it's usually because they're browsing and they're looking to find out what the heck this astrobiology class is all about. Maybe it's about UFOs. A lot of people think so. And so they log in, they watch a few lectures, they say, oh wow, this is real science. That's not what I wanted. And they go do something else, like play Zynga. So the question is, how many of the people who sign up for a MOOC actually intend to complete a MOOC? And of the people who do that, who in an entry survey tell us that they plan to complete the MOOC, they really plan to do all the assessments and watch all the videos, completion rates are, on average in the mid to high 70s. And which is very high for any online activity, including social games. And among those who furthermore sign up for the signature track and actually put some skin in the game, even as little as $50, completion rate's 88%. 88%. So that 3% represents the people who are, looking at this at a library, kind of browsing, leafing through a bunch of pages and saying, that's not what I was thinking, and they put it back on the shelf. That's where that 3% number comes from.
Fantastic. So let's move to you, Fred. I think we talked close to 6 months ago about MOOC platforms and whether UNSW should join. And I think you said to me, paraphrasing, not putting it nearly as eloquently as you might, why do we need to do that? We've got really great technology on campus anyway, and there's more to university education than MOOCs. But yesterday, UNSW joined Coursera. So could you explain to us both that specific decision, and I think at least as interestingly, where participation in MOOCs, in a MOOC platform like Coursera, fits into a broader technology-enabled future for UNSW or other Australian universities?
Oh, thanks. Just before I take this serious answer to this, I'm really worried, Daphne.
Uh-oh.
I know wherever I go there's a camera somewhere. I know whenever I talk on my mobile phone, it's going to appear on WikiLeaks the next day. And now whenever I type, people will know it's me. Yeah. And that is really scary.
I'm sure there are a lot of Big Brother kind of MOOCs, aren't there, out there,
Yeah.
So.
But no, serious question. And you might ask, why would an economic rationalist buy into a model where if there is a revenue side, it's at least very uncertain?
And you're going to have to contribute real money to have high-quality MOOCs at high production values that are going to cost you real money, and you're going to reduce my budget as a result, so you better be getting something out of this.
I'm going to do that whatever happens.
Okay.
So we can park that question.
Okay.
But
I think I'll just sort of slowly shrink in my chair here.
Let me back up a bit and say, one of the things we do at UNSW is every 6-8 months or so, the senior leadership group goes away for an off-site. I hate using the word retreat because I hope we advance, but it's an off-site. And, we deal with what kind of university we want to be. We talk about values. We talk about the money side and revenue models. And the last one, just before you joined us, we decided that we would talk about educational technology. Where was it going and how might it affect us? And we thought if we want to have that conversation, we should at least know what it is, which is a little testing, because I think for most of us, watching Michael Sandel was the closest we'd ever got to a MOOC. So we started off by we actually had a MOOC at the university. Richard Buckland had put up a MOOC in computer science with great success. Richard's a very talented teacher, and he talked to us about the MOOC and what it involved, and we said that's not sustainable because he was up all hours of the night. He couldn't keep away from answering the students. But nevertheless, what was really impressive was that he ran the MOOC in parallel with his conventional class, and at the end he gave the students, the normal assessment we do of the course, and the assessment of the MOOC was pretty good. It wasn't quite as good, but it was good. It was an assessment that we'd be happy for with any of our courses. We also had a look at some of the jazzier technology, Smart Sparrow, that taught us more about understanding cells than at least those of us with Jeff and my background, but not some of the others. So we did that. We had people talk to us about what was going on more broadly. We had the local head of Google come in with some of his team and just talk to us about where this technology is going and what they think. And we reflected on all of that. And what did we conclude? Well, number one, we said this is serious. We better pay attention to this. And number two, we said we really don't know how it's going to play out. And I think you all know the scenarios that people posit. One scenario that is put to me by our more technically minded colleagues is you might as well start planning on lower enrolments, you're dead. In fact, he made that prediction at the end of last year that this year's enrolments would suffer, and I guess they've suffered because they've gone up more than we expected. But that was at one extreme. At the other extreme, we've got that this is, in terms of your triple bottom line, a way to extend what the university does. And it's really, not part of, in terms of our triple bottom line, it's about the engagement part. I mean, we think about learning and teaching as one part of our bottom line, research as one part of our bottom line, and engagement as one with communities as one part. We said it's an engagement, but if it is an engagement, we have no idea what it'll cost us or what it'll do. There's very high uncertainty. And then, of course, the other extreme is this is going to enhance what you can do, and whether you call it the Prius model or the blended model, by taking the MOOC approach and combining it in a classroom, you can have the best of both worlds, and that it will enhance the university. But the honest conclusion was we just don't know. All of those things are possible, and we don't know. So what do you do when you don't know? Well, you buy options. And what makes an option valuable? An option is valuable the higher the uncertainty. An option is valuable the lower the exercise price. And the option is valuable the longer the time before you have to make a serious commitment.
We've got a finance MOOC in the making for you here, Fred.
Yeah.
I love this.
Yeah. Well, it's many years since I taught that, but
we'll see if we can make room for you.
You can have that lecture if you'd rather.
Okay.
The option valuation
as long as it's only
model.
15 minutes, that's all I want.
So anyway, I can do all of finance in 15 minutes.
Okay,
that's
good.
only a third.
Okay.
So we said, okay, you've got to get some options. Well, we've got some options. We've got Richard Buckland is an option. And he's very talented, built a platform, can do things, can do more things other people can join. But nevertheless, what we had was cottage industry options. We didn't have a serious option in terms of being involved with a major player. And so we looked at the major players, and I've had discussions with a number of them. Ian Martin, our Deputy Vice Chancellor Academic, and I have talked to some of the people together, and he's talked to more than I have. And we really were very much impressed with what Coursera had. And the number of people who had joined up, the quality of the people, the feedback we had, particularly from Melbourne, who we have very close relationships with, and we said and frankly the terms of the contract, which met all my requirements for a good option. So against that background, we signed up for the option. What reservation do I have? Not too many, because it's an option. But the thing that does worry me is that I think our sort of university, research-intensive university, has always had a challenge of what we call the research-teaching nexus, that somehow giving something unique in the education that builds off the fact that we have a very substantial activity base in research. And how do we do that? And I think the challenge that I see in MOOCs is, are MOOCs a way to enhance that, or MOOCs a way to blow that apart? And that part of uncertainty, I don't think I've yet found an option to deal with.
So I've got an answer for you that somebody said to me just the other day, and it's potentially a win-win between the regular university and a MOOC platform, which is, somebody said to me, think about taking a 15-minute chunk of somebody's MOOC as a guest lecture. But instead of getting a guest lecture from somebody who lives next door and can come to campus, you get it from the Nobel Prize winner who's on the MOOC platform. Boy, that's incredible. I still control my class, but I've now got this fantastic guest lecturer who comes in and gives me your quality piece on options. And maybe Coursera says, boy, that's of value to you, so will you charge you a few bucks for that? Everyone's won, and the academic hasn't lost control of his or her classroom, because there's just more material available now. So I've got world-class guest lecturers I can bring into my Intro to Finance course.
Yeah, and I think it's in the enhancing mode, in the blended mode, that you see that sort of advantage. I mean, you see advantages right from the beginning in terms of building reputation, in terms of having a lot of people try before you buy, to use your term. You see advantages in terms of how we do assessment. I think assessment, when we looked at what was driving our work as academics, assessment was probably the biggest use of time and was probably done in the way that was of least value. So, I think we can learn in terms of assessment. You can learn in terms of having the great lecturer show up in the class. So there are lots of ways in which I think this blended model can play out. But as I say, we have yet to learn which of those are the ones that are really, what's the 80-20? What are the 20% of things that deliver 80% of the value?
Okay, so let's move to you, Andrew, certainly last but certainly not least. So Fred's just said that this is a highly uncertain world. Anyone who looks at the history of IBM sees some big ups and some big downs in the last 30 years. So yep. we had PCs and Microsoft. We had the end of the mainframe. We had IBM sells its PC business to Lenovo in China. We have IBM comes back as a smarter planet technology solutions provider. There's a lot of up and down there. When you look at this university world, do you see, is it likely that there's that much up and down? Where are the risks? Where are the opportunities? What's it look like from the business world?
Firstly, as the only non-professor on this panel and in this audience,
I should have said, I'm Master daunted, of Commerce graduate.
I'm daunted by this audience,
Stevens.
but let me just have, let me do my best, Jeff.
I'm sure you'll
and
do.
I was intrigued
you'll do pretty well,
I was
Andrew.
intrigued by the title of your paper that you and Sean put together, which talked about evolution and revolution. And inherent in that title, I don't know how spot on you realised at the time you really were, but back to this point that Fred has talked about. There is uncertainty, and yet I can tell you that having studied this, because I'm not a technologist, I'm a strategy and transformation oriented consultant. And I've spent my 30 years since graduating from the University of New South Wales in that area. And the application of technology over that time, which is 32 years, out of the 50-something since the invention of the computer, is a significant component. But all I'd like to put in front of us all is we're still taking baby steps. We are still crawling. I doubt we're walking in how this technology and the outcomes it can produce, we're only very, very early in the journey, point one. Point two is, what I know you all see that your industry and this P-word pedagogy that you're involved in is unique. But if you look at many industries, which we do and we have, we see the same themes and ideas happening, albeit at different rates and paces. And so the same uncertainty that you see now about MOOCs, my view is that's the same uncertainty that people in retail saw when Amazon, not that many years ago, said we're going to sell books. And today Amazon has revenues greater than the Woolworths organisation in this country. They sell more nappies than do Kroger in the US, and they have an international business and have leveraged their core competency in terms of providing a cloud architecture to now be in business with a data centre and providing Amazon Web Services to businesses in this country. And who would have thought when people were saying Amazon versus Borders, are you out of your mind? Of course, how ridiculous. And yet Borders is gone, Kodak is gone, and others. So to me, this actually isn't about technology. This is a choice. It's a choice as to whether you regard this as evolution or you say this will be the cornerstone of a revolution. Because I'm absolutely convinced, having sat next to Daphne last night, that Coursera will be the Amazon of this industry. I'm not as confident that MOOCs will be around in 15 years, but I know that with you and Coursera working together, something will have replaced it if it goes. And it may be something that is much greater in revenue generation. So, like the early days, if you remember back when businesses said, and Sean, you said MOOCs have made universities cool again. If you remember back, the first businesses that had a presence on the internet had a brochure-related site that showed and showcased their products. Sometimes even it had a price list that you could download, but there was no interaction, there was no transactional basis, and that's when Jeff Bezos said, I'm going to change that, and he changed the world and said, I'm going to do a transactional-based business. I think the MOOC, as dramatic and revolutionary as it is the brochure-based site that is the early stages of the transformation in your industry. Because I wrote down, Sean, what you said. You said, as well as mentioning that word, you said it's about brand projection. It's about personalised, a presentation of the product, and it was about better pedagogy, which I would call about big data in future, learning from what it is. The fascinating thing that Daphne said last night, I went home, Daphne, and wrote 2 pages of notes based on what you told me because it struck so many chords. The thing about all of those interactions, of those 4.25 million people who've enrolled in these things called MOOCs, is Daphne knows at the keystroke level how those people have been approaching learning. And for the first time, we don't have a study based on a selected group of 15 people that we extrapolate. In my world in business, we studied econometrics, and Jeff and I have talked about how the world of strategy formulation needs to turf out econometrics and use big data. And it's exactly the same for you. The interesting thing, though, is most people can see the impact in other people's industries a lot easier than they can see it in their own. And so the research we're doing now is to look at the implication of the digital economy on business models. And where I would predict you will go with this, and I think I'm on safe ground based on other industries, media, that Fred knows a lot about, retail, education, all these, is that you need to look at this whole concept and the implication for your business model in how you operate the revenue model, the cost, performance, and productivity. No one changes their revenue model until they have to. And if I look at the dynamics in financial services, the next 12 years to 2025, our view is recapitalise foreign banks, will halve the interest rate spread and dramatically reduce the fee income potential for our financial institutions, mostly banks. Also, the entry of superannuation funds into the banking business, but also the entry of non-traditional competitors. Imagine PayPal with a banking license. Imagine Google Money with a banking license and what impact that will have. The only option our 4 banks will have will be to dramatically automate their processes. And so if I said to you, how many branches will Bank X have in 2025? 50% of today's, 100% or 150? I would say 50%, and they will be remissioned. How many employees? In their case, it will be lower. What will customer satisfaction be? It will be double. Because exactly the same data richness that comes from 4.25 million MOOC registrants will be exactly the same in the bank, and it will be a dramatically better service at half the cost to income ratio. The pressure that will come on you, I think, on funding, on competition, and on performance. We only need to look at the tax deductibility, this ridiculous decision. Tax deductibility of self-education at the $2,000 level, absurd. We look at federal government funding, we look at all this. The pressures on finances and also the exchange rates changing, the attractiveness of our education, this wonderful export industry is under pressure. We will get there. So I would say decide to make this a revolution. Take the steps, starting with MOOCs, dive in, because what we see is more borders and more Kodaks. The rate of change will mean that evolution in an organisational sense, in a university sense, in higher education sense, there will not be enough time for adaptation. There will not be enough capital for adaptation. The leaders will very much set the pace, and the followers will not nestle into a low and unattractive market share. They'll disappear. They'll disappear, and it will happen in the next 12 years, between here and 2025. The final point, Jeff. Daphne
You didn't
said,
want to end on that
Daphne's,
downer, that we
no.
should all slit
I
our
want to
wrists
end on
right
interesting.
now? Okay.
Daphne said there are 3 industries that have not been transformed by technology. One was government, public administration and safety. Second one was medicine, and the third one was education. And we did some research last year to look at the impact of high-speed broadband on the Australian economy, and we looked at every single industry class, all 509 of them, that the Bureau of Statistics recognises. All but 15 at the industry level will be advantaged. And we're following that up. Interestingly, number 1 was public administration in terms of its size and the potential to improve. Number 4 was health, and number 6 was education. And because of the upside potential in transformation, the upside potential and also the scale of what it is in terms of the overall economy. So I think I'm an optimist to a fault. But this is not, please don't make this a technology issue. This is about leadership, and I would say dive into the revolution.
And of course, you know, a point that Sean and I make in our report is that unlike music, where record companies and bands were very worried that iTunes and other things were going to destroy them, universities are, you know, the DNA of Coursera. You get all of this support from universities. Now, Andrew, the sort of more positive rendering of this story that Sean and I tried to pursue, if for no other reason than I'm obsessed with late 1960s rock and roll, is that, you know, iTunes didn't kill the Rolling Stones. In fact, it made the Rolling Stones concert more attractive. Now, of course, everyone was trying to rediscover their youth. Maybe that was so it's overdetermined. But concerts became more attractive, and there are more of them because more people knew about the music, and indie bands even now.
But Jeff,
they don't make money on iTunes, but maybe they get some people to show up to their concerts.
It's even more interesting, though, I think, and I'm personally scarred by this industry because I was consulting one of the, in fact, the market-leading music company, record company, in 1998 and the regional head said, Andrew, you've got this wrong. People will always prefer the entertainment value of face-to-face retail. 1998. Remember Napster, right? And the record company said, we're so under threat by this business model, and yes, there were legal aspects to it around copyright, but the music companies did their best and they ganged up and they destroyed Napster through legal action. Could you imagine what would have happened if they said, listen, the reparations here are you have to join us and we're going to create an online platform where we're going to sell our product digitally? Where would Apple be? I don't think they'd exist. I don't think they'd exist. And that's why I say, take a revolutionary view and apply this because it's there.
Can I jump in with a question for Daphne?
Yes, last one, and then we'll open it up to everybody else.
Because I think this question of evolution, revolution is kind of gilding the lily. If you get technology coming into an industry, then generally there are winners and losers. That's right. The winners quite often are from outside the industry. That's been quite common. The losers are always from within the industry, by definition. And we don't talk much about that. And I'd be really interested in your view as to what's this going to do to the structure of universities, and who are potentially the winners, and where would you not want to be if the way you see this evolving is the way it will evolve?
So I agree that there will be winners and losers, and in fact people often ask me of the incumbents in there, which are obviously the universities, which are the ones that are going to fail and disappear. Is it the big ones, the little ones, the liberal arts colleges, the community colleges in the United States, the public institutions? Which are the ones that are going to suffer? And the answer that I give is that the ones that are going to disappear are the ones that take the ostrich strategy. There's still institutions out there that think this is a temporary fad, and that if they just wait it out for just another 6 months, it will all go away and we will all go back to business as normal. And I think that that's a losing strategy.
But they think that because that's what happened when the dot-com bubble burst. So what's different 10 years after that from what happened back then?
But I would point out that that is also what happened to a bunch of small-town newspapers when they saw the technology taking over the journalism industry and said, no one will ever read their news on a computer screen. People don't like that. They like to feel a crunchy newspaper, right? And look where they all are today.
It gets really dirty on your fingers.
It does. That dirt is really good. Yeah. And you can wrap fish and chips in it, so it has all sorts of advantages. So I mean, I can talk to why today is different from where it was 10 years ago. I think the primary difference is the extent to which society has evolved to the point that today's kids are not only accepting, but in fact expecting to get to consume most of their content and most of their social interaction via digital media as opposed to face-to-face interaction. So for them, the fact that you would actually go into a classroom and let somebody lecture at you for an hour and a half is totally anachronistic. So I think this is really what's going to drive this as a transformational change, because the kids that are coming into our universities today are totally different from the generation that came in 10 years ago, and for them this is what they expect to see. So universities that think that this is all going to go away if they just pretend this doesn't exist, those are the ones that are going to suffer, and the ones that basically embrace this, as Andrew said, and come into this saying, look, we understand that the world is changing, we have a value proposition to offer students. And it's not just about content, because content is about to become a commodity. Wikipedia has shown that. Khan Academy has shown that afterwards, and we're showing that in yet another incarnation. And so the question is then, what is the value proposition of a university? And a university had better be able to enunciate it, not just internally, but also externally to the many students that are coming in. Why are you coming here and paying me tuition rather than just watching all this stuff online? And I think universities that do that clearly and explicitly and come up with something of value, and I know that there are valuable things that universities can offer to students, and I can let Fred speak to that, or I can throw out some stuff, those are the ones that are going to survive.
Excellent. So we've got probably a good 30 minutes for us now to broaden the conversation to everyone in the room. We've got one microphone. We have one microphone. If you'd like to speak, please raise your hand.
Give this one away.
Oh, you need to hold the microphone. You're a high-paid talent here for us this evening. Merlin, could you identify yourself for us?
So my name's Merlin Crossley. I'm the Dean of Science at UNSW. I love this stuff. I love the online stuff. I love the progressive nature. But I sort of agree with Sean. MOOCs is an appalling acronym.
I agree.
And I think the reason the M is there is because it's better than OOCs and better than OX. I think that's the only reason. But it's the M that bothers me. I sort of don't know. You said when you saw your president of your university, just a professor's time is better spent engaging than just giving a lecture. And I just don't know how one scales the quality up to massive. If you have all these people just sort of handling the course, how you get that quality at the massive level, that's the thing that troubles me.
Could you answer the question, but include this wonderful story about peer grading and how that works on a massive scale?
Okay. So you're absolutely right that one thing that does not scale to the massive case is the instructor dealing with hundreds of thousands of students on a personal basis. And I think it's important to, first of all, distinguish the two populations that we have. There are those people who can come to campus and engage with you in this kind of interactive way. And it's great that we can offer them that. And then there's the hundreds of millions of have-nots who will never have that opportunity. And so the question about the massive is, how can we offer an education to all of those people who in the normal course of events would not be so privileged? So that's the first part of the answer, and I think it's important to realize that what they're currently getting, even if they're not getting that precious asset, which is your time, is so much better than what they currently have, that I think we're really doing them a tremendous service by giving them that opportunity. Now, the second piece of this is that actually, in some ways, massive is better. It's not quite this, it's not quite a strictly inferior experience, because what you lose in the hub and spoke model of everyone comes to you and you're the sole repository of wisdom is you lose the wisdom and richness of a community that interacts with people from around the globe. And you're taking a sociology class where you're getting somebody's perspective who lives in a culture that is totally different from yours and that you would never in the normal course of events talk about, or an expert in the discipline who happens to have worked on this task that is really exciting and interesting, and you learn from their experience. So this crowdsourcing of teaching and learning is one of the beauties of the MOOC model, which makes it, I think, incomparable in quality, not worse and not better than the kind of interaction that they would get with an expert. And so now to answer specifically Jeff's point, one of the ways that we've leveraged that is not only in peer teaching, but also in peer assessment, so that students can and do submit work and get feedback from 5 or more of their peers on the work that they did. And they get a diversity of opinions, again, from a very broad range of different perspectives. And that really helps inspire their work and creates a real richness of interaction.
And the students who are doing the grading take it very seriously, right?
Well, not all of them. There's always some slackers. But most of them take it very, very seriously. And furthermore, tell us that they learn as much from grading the work of their peers as they do from doing the work themselves, because they also see how other people approach the same problem.
Just one very brief point on this. Most businesses that go down this digitisation of the business model journey, there's 2 vectors. One is change the way you operate and deliver the business and deliver today's products and services. And the other one is enhance and transform the value of the products and services. And most go the first. And they say, this is how we're going to deliver this existing thing. And their thinking is very much about the existing model. They just got a new way of delivering. And what happens very quickly is they then realise that they've unpacked and learnt about the components of the value that they provide and then start to transform that. So if you've got a 2x2 matrix, you end up in the top right-hand corner in the end. The stockbroking industry is the best example I can give you. They used to charge us all 3%, regardless of the transaction value, because you needed to be a member of the stock exchange to actually place an order. Today it's $10.95 as a base level, and then it goes up to about, $30, $40 depending on how big, but not much. So the revenue model, and therefore at the heart of it, the value of the broking relationship, is being completely unpacked, because the access to the market to place the transaction at your request, at your timescale, has been separated from the value of the advice. And most brokers are absolutely struggling with, how do I charge for this advice which is really there? So this point about separating the way I deliver it and the thinking that goes with today's product from the transformation of the product, that's why I was intrigued with Daphne's comment about what they've learned from the analytics that they do about those interactions. Interestingly, you know, if people are online for 7.5 minutes, it's a bit like, you know, all of us used to buy albums, and now iTunes sells single songs, because people didn't always want all those B-sides. They wanted the 2 or 3 really good tracks. Maybe MOOCs are telling us something about that, and we're transforming the value of what we are doing and the way we're delivering it.
The microphone is over here.
Hi, my name's Alan Fekete. I'm a Professor of Computer Science at the University of Sydney, and I also head the Academics and Standards and Policy Committee of the Academic Board of the University. And I want to bring the word pedagogy right to the fore. I mean, there have been attempts
You can use it, I just can't use it.
To get away from it, but I think it's critical. And I'd like to draw attention to some examples, because an underlying assumption that's been, I think, in all the speakers so far, is that MOOCs are good educationally, good pedagogy. They teach well. You've got these great professors. The evidence is very much the other way. If you look at a specific example, introductory programming in computer science. There's recently a review by Mordechai Ben-Ari, one of the leading computing education experts, who actually sat through as a student both the Coursera and the Udacity introductory programming MOOCs, and wrote a review which panned both of them for appalling pedagogy. They didn't cover central material that was necessary for people to actually be effective. They ignored the richness of the understanding that the computing education community has gathered about what one needs to do in teaching, and particularly the attempts to scale the assessment were extraordinarily unsuccessful, both the automated grading, which sort of ignored a whole lot of the design aspects of the subject, and the peer assessment, which was often extremely poor quality. So,
okay, so
Daphne's
those are fighting
puzzled,
words.
but
those are fighting words.
So, the question I would ask is to all of you, given that it's not necessarily the case that the pedagogy is going to be good.
No, but I think you've got to allow Daphne to talk about what I've seen Coursera has said about experiences. I mean, the criticism that you levied was they didn't put the right stuff in the course. Well, that's up to a lecturer. But the question, there was some pretty fighting words in there. Do you want to respond to them?
I'd like to get to the question if I could.
We know the question. You think it's all a load of nonsense. So how can we do it better?
That's not the question. The question is, how are we going to tell whether courses are good or not, when the assessment is an important part of the education? Elsewhere, we have a whole structure of accreditation, self-accreditation, committees like my own which check for quality in different ways. How can we try to check for quality in a system where education is being done through MOOCs?
Okay, so not having read the specific article to which you refer, I'm not going to respond to the specific criticisms that are levied against courses that I can tell you have been speaking for hours. I don't want to speak for Udacity's because I haven't looked at it, but the courses that we have in introductory programming have gotten rave reviews from students, from educators, and so I don't know what the specific criticisms are, and certainly in a shortened course, which these are half semester as opposed to full semester courses, there's bound to be material that some people consider to be important that is omitted from the discussion, and some people are always going to find that violently offensive. effective. Having sat on curriculum committees, I can certainly attest to that. So I actually, from what I have seen in the assessments, I don't know which specific course was even being assessed, but the ones that I've seen from the institutions that have offered these, I've thought they were, and I'm a computer scientist myself, thought that these assessments were actually outstanding. But be that as it may, let's leave that aside for the moment. I think to the actual question that you wanted to discuss, which is the, sorry, there's something flying over my head, of how do you vet quality of a course. First of all, let me make the somewhat controversial, but I believe true observation that very few universities actually vet the quality of their existing on-campus courses. You might end up, maybe University of Sydney is different, but speaking for many institutions that I've seen, no one looks at the content of a colleague's class and says, they're not covering that, I really think they should, or these assessments are not as good as they ought to be. So that's the first observation. The second observation is certainly if you wanted to put any kind of quality assessments in place about MOOCs or any other kind of class, physical, face-to-face, or hybrid, there are ways to do that. There's curriculum committees that can look at the content, that can look at the assessments, that can tell whether the assessments align with learning outcomes, and there's no difference in the assessment process in doing so in face-to-face versus MOOC classes. In fact, in MOOC classes, if anything, it's easier because you have full transparency of the entire material, quality of teaching, assessments, whereas in a face-to-face class, you never exactly know what's going to happen in class and what's going to be delivered. So I don't see this as a harder problem to solve in the MOOC space than it is to solve in the space of face-to-face classes. If anything, I would say it's easier. And somebody just has to do it if that's the goal.
And rather than our speculating about what's a good class, you just get, as Andrew said, you get every keystroke. So you know everything that happened. And you know the examples that I've seen, the ones about performance improvement, for example, when students can take tests multiple times. Your
the
two
mastery learning.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if it's a data problem, the good news is there's more data, I would think, not less data. Fred?
Yeah, but the other answer to the comment is exactly what drove us to do what we're doing, which is there's very high uncertainty. And when you say it's high uncertainty, what does that mean? Well, you know, clearly there's uncertainty about how the product will develop. And, you know, Andrew said maybe it won't be a MOOC, it may be something else. Yeah, there's uncertainty about how the product will be received. You know, we've had enormous variability in your report, but in the very short time, enormous variability in terms of the people signing up and the people dropping out. So, you know, there's that risk. There's enormous variability in the financial returns that might be delivered. We don't know what they are. You get some ideas, but you don't know, and you don't know how big they're going to be. So, you know, my response to your comment would be yes. And what should we do differently? And I think, you know, the answer has got to be you've got to continue to build the value of your option. So you've got to learn more and play more, and in that way you won't be blindsided by it. And I do think there will be winners and losers.
The microphone is one row back.
First, I'd like to thank you all for giving us your talks. It's been really good to listen to it. In terms of Australian universities, the 35 or 36 of them, would you expect in the next 5 or 10 years that some of them might become teacherless universities? And what number in that case?
Do I want to get that?
Yeah.
Can I just give some...
I
Fred,
absolutely don't want to be on the public record about that.
I'm just going to give for the group the flavour, which I think is really quite interesting at the moment. So in our report, we talk about 2 Australian universities that are exploiting online extraordinarily successfully at the moment. One university is the University of New England in Armidale, which has always had a locational disadvantage. There are only 15,000 people in Armidale. They have 5,000 students on campus. They have 15,000 students online. Now, they've been doing that for a long time because it was a distance education model where we used to mail the stuff out. Now they can do it not only online more cheaply, but they can add all of these interactive bells and whistles. So I think you'd argue that that's improved that's improved UNE's ability to deliver on its mission. Second example, which is a sort of startup example, is Swinburne University in Victoria, in a partnership with SEEK, just last year, created a fully online undergraduate experience where you didn't ever have to go to any of their campuses to get a degree. They have 7,000 full-time students in 1 year doing that. If part of their mission is an access mission, it looks like Swinburne has increased access without increasing its cost base proportionately. This is a scale economy story. So you still need the content providers, whether you get them from Stanford or Swinburne or UNE, but this allows you to scale. So you still need people to provide the content. Now the question, I think, Fred, for Vice Chancellors and others is, do you source the content with your people? Do you outsource the content, or do you do some kind of combination, the way I was suggesting with the sort of MOOC as guest lecturer model? I mean, I don't know how you think about that.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the book that was written some years ago, The Winner-Take-All Economy, and it's quite potent, I think, in terms of an argument. It doesn't always exist. Your record example is interesting. I'm not sure I agree entirely with it, but with the advent of technologies, everybody only wants the best, and the best's available. And they did, some interesting studies, say, in sports, the difference between the number 1 golfer and the number 10 golfer, or the number 1 player and the number 10 tennis player, not the number 1 and the number 100, but that those differences were actually expanding, not contracting. And you have to, if this is going to be a winner-take-all, or winners take all, because I think this is much more complex than a single game, single measured output. But if it's going to be a winner take all phenomenon, then I think there will be some losers. I've said that. In answer, I don't know how many, and I don't know who they'll be. It doesn't mean they'll be necessarily the small ones either. There might be more opportunity for a regional university with a franchise to do a fairly heavy mix of outsourcing, but provide all those other benefits that I don't need to go through, of being on a campus and being in a peer group, and when you're 18 or 19 or 20, having a place to go to every day to do your learning, when you're really not wishing or ready to go into full-time work, as seems to be the case today. So I think it's complicated.
I actually don't think we're going to lose, by and large, the notion of an on-campus teacher, because I think their role is likely to change. I think there's going to be fewer of our instructors who focus on the delivery of content, and more that focus on actual teaching, which is interacting and engaging with the students. And it could be around content that's produced by them or by a colleague down the hall, or it could be by content that's produced across the globe by somebody who's a world-leading expert, but they still need to be there to interact and engage with students, to help them along, to facilitate the discussion, and to really create this into a lively and interactive environment. I don't think there's that many students who can really just, take an entire course of study as autodidacts completely on their own and complete it successfully. So we're still going to need teachers.
Where's the microphone moved? Where should it go? We should probably do some movement across this way, just for geographic spread, if no other reason. And anyone who wears a bow tie to an event, I think, surely deserves a...
The risk
it is an academic event after all.
The risk of giving it to me, of course, is that my colleague asked for it first, so I'm going to give it to her next. Well,
if you'd worn the bow tie, bow tieism.
Well, I'm not sure if I'm the only bow tie here, but I'm sure I might be one of the only non-academics, apart from our friend from IBM. Workstar is my company. Richard McLean is my name. We do large-scale engagement of large groups of people to learn and understand and change and actually do something different for large corporations and government departments. So all Australians or all of McDonald's employees and things like that. And the thing that we found that's really interesting is what's utility? What is utility to the person? Combining the strategic objective to utility to the market. And my question is that we talk a lot about whether we're going to be ostriches or whether we're not going to be ostriches, and whether there's still going to be teachers or whether they're not going to be teachers, and whether we're going to help the iTunes of the world as the record companies did by trying to make it not happen or not. But for me, I think those things are perhaps not quite as interesting as if we're combining pedagogy with utility for the students. What are the demographics of the students? Is it an undergraduate thing? Is it a postgraduate thing? Is it a pre? Is it a mature audience returning? And for the major demographics, what are the major points of utility for the students that will cause, whatever we do, will cause the students to come to us?
So you're asking about the demographics of our students. It ranges all over the map. It starts from, I mean, we have students that are as young as 10 years old in some of the introductory programming classes, for example, that we talked about, as well as students that are as well into their 90s. There's a group of octogenarians that sent us an email saying they were embarrassed to take courses at the community college because people looked at them funny, but they take the class online and meet at the public library once a week to talk about the material. It's really cool, actually. They come from all over. That said, even though that is the spread, the sort of mode of the distribution is the 25 to 35 or 40-year-old working professional. Most of them are, well, I don't know if most of them, but a good part of them are taking courses that they consider to be career enhancing, whether it be, courses in finance or in computer programming or whatever. But at the same time, we have some of our largest classes still catering to that same group of largely working professionals that are completely unrelated to people's careers. These are courses in philosophy and psychology and arts and humanities, and people are taking them because they want to enrich their minds. And I think what we've revealed is actually a deep hunger for education that transcends the formal education years of your undergraduate degree and persists throughout your life and has not really had an outlet until these MOOCs came about.
In fact, I think the number one Coursera MOOC, if there's a top of the pops on Coursera, it's reasoning and arguing. It's a philosophy class. And one thing that Sean and I were really quite surprised by was that according to the best statistics we can get, 45% of MOOCs are in humanities and social sciences. Only 55% are in STEM, where you might think there are right and wrong answers, which is really very interesting, I think. Yes, that's a lovely bow tie-like necklace you're wearing.
The advantage of sitting beside the bow tie is that he's a gentleman and he acknowledged and handed over. So I'm Elizabeth Rosser from UNSW, Foundation Studies. I am really excited about the paper that you've written, but also about coming into a forum that is very different to the other forums on MOOCs. And that is a forum that looks beyond just the dichotomy between on-campus and off-campus experience, and that goes beyond just looking at the finances and the business model of MOOCs. One of the things that's been frustrating for me listening, and I was an early adopter, so I went into the first MOOCs in edX and also in Coursera, and Udacity. And one of the things that
You've
really...
hit the big three there.
Yeah, and others. The thing that was really exciting about this was about the access. It was about hearing more voices, using technology to do what that technology does best. And it wasn't an attack or an erosion on the on-campus experience. It's about using the technology wisely for what it does best. And what frustrated me since then is that everything was about the business model. And it was about one university compared to another university, forgetting that universities are primarily public-funded bodies for the advancement of social capital. It's about making us all smarter. It's like the Robo-Cup that UNSW does very well at, where they give away the code.
We can't have any more infomercials here. We'll have to get to a question.
I mean, that's not my thing, but they give away the code, and they give away their code after the competition in order to advance human knowledge. It's about pushing us all forward. And I think it is actually a moot point about whether we should...
Is that a MOOC point or a moot point? That's a moot point.
Whether,
are you coming to the MOOC point, by the way?
whether MOOCs are going to happen or not happen.
Yeah.
The fact is, this technology is transforming. It should transform, and if we do it well, we will do it evolutionary and revolutionary.
Good. Amen to that. Where are we going to go? Let's go over into the behind the column there. Maybe we can, all the panelists can still see you.
Hello there, George Peppernickel is my name. Also another non-academic, but I must say I suspect Andrew's got the least qualifications up there, but possibly the most income. So I don't know what that tells you about the need for qualifications. Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on this idea of pedagogy to a degree, but also some of the, what I see maybe the long-term trends that need to be investigated with these MOOCs. That's also the name of an apparel company, I believe. Daphne, I don't know if you've had any copyright issues. There's this youth sports apparel company called MOOCs with a K, not with a...
I did not come up
No,
with
you've
the
obviously
name
haven't
MOOC,
heard from their lawyers, so don't worry about it.
Despise it.
Yeah.
But,
It's a
anyway.
British word.
And it's not trademarked, so...
Yeah, but basically I just wanted to ask about, have you been developing any kind of long-term studies in terms of the possible detriments and benefits of homogenization of thinking that might result in a worldwide... You know, if you're using the same Nobel Prize lecturer because he's the best, or she, let's not be sexist, you might necessarily then get a certain kind of, you know, sort of orthodoxy in thinking, which might mitigate against, you know, particular culturally specific, you know, ideas that might lead to, you know, breakthroughs in some other areas. So the way you're nodding, I suspect you have. But there will also be positives in terms of, you know, we might all get together and, you know, dismiss our differences and sing Kumbaya.
Okay, homogenization versus heterogenization, or whatever that very long and ugly word would be.
Yes, which is still better than MOOCs. So I think that's a legitimate concern and one that we ought to be watchful for. But let me tell you why I'm actually not as worried about that. So first of all, I don't expect there to be a single MOOC on a given topic. I would expect there to be 5, 10, 15, depending on the popularity of the topic, in the same way that you have textbooks. You have more than one textbook on a topic. There isn't one micro-econ textbook. There is probably 15 or so. I would expect the same thing to happen here. The second thing that I would expect to happen, because the barrier to entry here is so much lower than that of writing a textbook, is that while we might get sort of a certain consolidation around a given topic, you're going to get a huge diversity in the long tail that currently we're not seeing. Right now, if you're an instructor who teaches a topic that is somewhat obscure, there's going to be an audience of 3 people at your institution, and your administration is going to look at you funny and say, we can't afford for you to teach this class on a regular basis. Go teach something more popular. Right now, when you go out into the world at large, you might get an audience of not 3, but maybe a smallish MOOC. Maybe it's only going to have 15 or 20,000 people, which is our smaller MOOCs. And that's going to be enough to sustain this. And we saw this happening in journalism. There was a certain consolidation of newspapers. A lot of small-town newspapers kind of lost their audience, and we have a relatively smaller number of large newspapers like the New York Times and so on. But at the same time, we now have this thing called a blog. And there's tens of thousands of bloggers that until then wouldn't have had any chance of making a career around what their passion was, but now they have a worldwide audience, which is enough to make it interesting for them to do this. And so I think we're going to have a very long tail that will actually enrich the overall sort of intellectual capital of the world.
Okay, so I'm looking at my watch. We probably have time for 1 intervention if it's lengthy and 2 if they're shorter.
There's been a lot of discussion. My name is Pradeep. There's been a lot of discussion about impact of MOOCs in higher education. How do you see the impact on corporate training, lifelong learning, and vocational training?
Maybe Andrew should take that one.
I don't think there'll be any difference. In fact, I think there'll be application in primary education as well. I don't think there'll be any limits. But my point is these are baby steps that we're learning about how to basically achieve the utility or the outcome. And really, this is going to be, I think, the biggest shot in the arm in your profession in pedagogy that has been in anyone's memory. possibly.
He did.
I did. I'm learning. I'm becoming infiltrated.
You are a
It is
convert.
becoming. This will be the biggest shot in the arm, because the study, and that what will determine the success of Coursera versus those other two big platforms. Who learns the most from the data, and who says ours is the platform that gets the outcome and the utility the best because we understand the customer. Same reason why Google and others are successful. Same reason why IBM spends $7 billion a year in research in understanding cognitive and adaptive computing in free text language, because it's where the future is. So I think there's going to be a shot in the arm. But people that can't adapt and are too threatened and say, this is challenging and I want to just do teaching, they're under threat because the delivery mechanism is going to change. But the study of learning and teaching and getting to the outcomes is going to be fundamentally transformed. This is the most exciting time in your industry, believe it or not. It's the most exciting time.
Last question.
Just one comment. I think there's a great opportunity in the corporate area and executive education in continuing to stay dated. But whether we call it a MOOC, that's where the word is. It won't be a MOOC. It'll be the use of the technology that's being pioneered into those environments. But I think it's a great opportunity, and potentially a great opportunity for universities who have become familiar with this.
Last question.
Yes, absolutely.
Last question. There is where did the mic go? Melissa, you're in charge.
Hi, I'm Aaron Nargis, lecturer at University of Sydney and a research associate at the US Study Center. And Fred, you brought up the term the research-teaching nexus, and I think that's an interesting area of development here. And I was wondering if Coursera's working with lecturers to try to understand ways in which research and teaching can be kind of scaled back and forth. I know you're talking about a kind of adaptive textbook in which students can potentially chart their own ways through the courses, and I'm just sort of wondering where that technology is going and how you see that developing.
Please, you should have the last word, Daphne, I think.
There's an open source textbook writing company called Scalar, which allows you to say, if I'm going to present something to an undergraduate student, there may be things that could be attached to that would be relevant to a graduate student. So just to put it all out there, all the research out there on a cloud in a sort of, and let students move through it themselves. Are you working with any other, say, data companies that try to create that infrastructure to create this sort of digital university environment where students can navigate to their own sort of liking?
It's getting longer, this question.
I'm having a harder time understanding it. I think I'm going to take this question one level up. I think, coming back to some of the comments that Andrew made, we are at the very earliest stages of this journey that we started on in terms of trying to figure out how to build courses that are, on the one hand, easy for instructors to construct, and at the same time are useful and valuable to students of different interests, different levels of ability, different trajectories that they want to take through it. Right now, the courses are the way they are because it is an enormous amount of work to put one of these things together, and what we've done is we've tried to build it in a way that is as easy as possible to construct one of these things. These complicated sort of, let's take multiple trajectories, multiple pathways, we tried that actually in the very earliest attempts that we had. The instructors just walked away. It was too complicated to deal with. Probably it's because we didn't have the right tools, and maybe in 3 years the world will look completely different in terms of where we'll be in our journey in pedagogy, and we'll be in a position to provide better tools that might make something like that easier. So I think the important lesson to take away that transcends the point that you made but includes it is that what we're viewing as MOOCs today is something that when we look back in 5 years, we'll say, that? I mean, this is what we were doing? In the same way that if you look back at movies that were made at the very, very beginning of the age of cinema, these were televised theater plays, and people now look at them and say, that's not a movie. And so I think that we'll be in a very different position even 3 years from now, and certainly 15 years from now. We'll be able to provide much richer, more exciting, more engaging experiences to our students that produce better learning outcomes that we will know how to do because we will use big data.
Wow. What an extravaganza we've had tonight. It's my duty and task now to try to put in some summation remarks, and it's a bit difficult, but let me give it a try. We started with the question, revolution or evolution, and I think that what Daphne has shown us is that with MOOCs, there's been a whole new class of student accessing higher education for the first time. We heard about octogenarians. We also can imagine, a student in Colombo in Sri Lanka at 3 a.m. on their mobile phone accessing a MOOC from the best universities in the world. One of the things that I'd like to extrapolate a little bit for our friends gathered here tonight is that currently we have 4.25 million Courserians who are taking up to 400 courses from 86 universities. Daphne and Coursera have an ambition to have 5,000 courses available on Coursera within 3 to 5 years. I don't know how many hundreds of millions of students that will equate to, or indeed how many universities. But at some point, there's probably going to be a tipping point, certainly a tipping point for the coolness of a university's marketing, where the student comes to university and say, do you guys do MOOCs? But beyond that, I think it comes to what Andrew was saying. And that is, we need to experiment from the beginning because the rate of change is so rapid that the incumbents won't have any time to adapt. It's not about the technology, it's about the customer service. And if we look at the behavior of the future customers, if we look at the students of 2025, we see that they're interacting in rich online social communities, and they're consuming education in ways that we haven't even begun to imagine. So the challenge is for Fred, at a place-based university, how can a university like UNSW renew, review, regenerate the value proposition of why it's really important to come to a university and sit in a physical place and learn? And it's more about the learning, more than the learning process. It's about investing in the rich ecosystem that are our institutions and have been around for a long time. So revolution or evolution, maybe if we mingle the two, it's kind of like rapid evolution, and it's probably certainly what is happening. But we've had a feast tonight, and like with all good feasts, I think it's time now to quench our thirsts. We have drinks available outside, but before we do that, please join me in thanking our fantastic panel.